right. So, hi, my name is Lucretia, and I'm with the Latte Wellness Group. I'm here with today with Frank Latte, the owner, and William Nicoll, who is going to do a presentation for everyone on resilience-focused counseling. It's a pleasure to have you here, William. Love for you to go ahead and just dive in.
Okay, I'll do it in one condition. You stop calling me William and start calling me Bill, because
Perfect.
it always sounds like my mother's mad at me when I hear the name Williams.
Understandable.
And you throw in my middle name and I know I'm in trouble. So, okay.
Full name call out. Yes. Familiar with it.
Oh, okay. I've been invited. I'm, like I said, Dr. Bill Nicoll. I've spent the last half century in the counseling field. Hopefully I've learned something along the way, and I want to talk about the concept of resilience, what I would actually call resilience-focused counseling. And the main thing there is my interest has been throughout my career on how do we develop mentally healthy, well-adjusted individuals? How does that happen? The goal of counseling should not be to decrease symptoms or to cure symptoms, but rather to increase mental health, the social well-being, or what we're now referring to those as resilience. So from that perspective, let's kind of talk about what we've learned over the years about resilience, and how that develops, and what the components are, and we can take it from there. But for a lot of people, that requires a major change in perspective, and that's why I have on the cover of this little handout that you can see up in the corner, a comment or quote from D. Hawk. He's the man who founded a little company that was fairly successful. It's called Visa. He was the CEO and founder of this Visa Corporation. And he once said, "The problem is never how to get new ideas or innovative thoughts into your mind, but rather how to get the old ones out." And most people have been trained in counseling, and especially in North America, big focuses on diagnosis and disorders, and is to cure the disorder. And the resilience approach takes a totally opposite approach to that. The goal of therapy should always be, or the goal of counseling should always be, to increase the client's mental health, social well-being. Because when you increase mental health, social well-being, the problematic behaviors, the disordered behaviors, whatever you want to call them, obviously disappear. As health increases, pathology decreases. So we're going to take that perspective a little bit here and get onto it. Now, the other thing is we hear this word resilience a lot, as I said. We hear it with, well, every other day in every field, somebody's talking about resilience. And trouble is when we all use the same term, its meaning kind of gets lost in the process. It's used in so many different ways. But most typically, people refer to resilience as the ability to bounce back. And I never felt comfortable with that term because over my career, I've worked with a lot of people who never had anything positive to bounce back to. The idea is you can't go someplace you can't go back to someplace you've never been. And unfortunately, I've dealt with all too many clients, and especially youth and adolescents. They've never been in a healthy place. They've never been in a positive place. Life has been a struggle. So we kind of talk about it here at our Resilience Counseling and Training Center, which, by the way, is I co-direct with my wife, Monica Nicoll. And we've kind of taken this approach. It's a two-part thing when we talk about resilience. First of all, it's the ability to set a positive, productive, fulfilling, and goal-oriented direction in your life. Okay? Mental health, a healthy well-being, a healthy foundation, while also being therefore equipped to handle the inevitable adversity, stress, rejection, failures, and setbacks of life in stride. Oh, sure, your knees may buckle from time to time, but you're able to get back up and say, where was I? How do I deal with this and move on? The person who does not have a sense of resilience, that healthy background, does not have that ability to bounce back and has to take some less productive ways of handling it. So it's the ability to bounce back up and continue moving in that same positive, socially useful, productive, contributive direction in one's life. And that's how I'm going to look at it, two pieces. Along the same line, look at resilience as a sort of two different ways. First of all, it's a social vaccine. And after we've all gone through COVID and so forth, everybody's familiar with the idea of vaccines to prevent problems. So developing resilience in our clients, in children, adolescents, and so forth, it's immunize them against the adverse effects of trauma, loss, stress, and life social ills. That means depression, substance abuse, anxiety, loss, trauma. These are the inevitable setbacks we all face in life. But when we have worked to develop a solid foundation of resilience, mental health, social well-being, that's the person that can bounce back and get back in the positive direction. So and the quote I like on that is by a man named Dr. Jonas Salk, who you may be familiar as the man who, the last major and much more, actually more troublesome than COVID was, the last major epidemic or pandemic was polio back in the 40s and 50s. And that created a lot of deaths, a lot of people have permanent handicaps from that, and difficulties in life. And they were closing down movie theaters. They were closing down swimming pools to keep people away from infecting one another. But in the late 50s, Dr. Salk came up with a vaccine. And as a result of that vaccine, polio has been all but eliminated across the globe. Okay. And it's always a matter of developing health is much more important. Actually, that goes back to Greek pathology. You keep coming back. There are no new ideas. No matter who says they got a new idea, they're lying or they haven't done their research. Someone had it hundreds of years ago, maybe thousands. The ancient Greeks in Greek mythology talked about the god of health had two daughters, Hygienia and Panacea. Panacea was the goddess of curing diseases. Hygienia was the goddess of promoting healthy environments, healthy lifestyles. And Hygienia has done much more effective work in promoting health and protecting health than Panacea ever did. Pills, treatments, whatever. But cleaning up the waterways, cleaning up the sewage running down the roads was the best way to clean up the plagues of Europe, for example, centuries ago, and continues to be. So it's not a new idea. We have both approaches, and this is still part of what we do in counseling today. But going back to Dr. Salk, on the 35th anniversary of his discovery of the polio vaccine, he was asked a simple question. Dr. Salk, if you were a young research scientist today, on what would you be working? And his answer was right on with the concept of resilience. He said, I'd still do immunization, but I'd do it psychologically rather than biologically. And when I say that we look at developing resilience as a social vaccine, that's exactly what we're trying to do, developing psychological immunity to the mental health problems. The entire DSM manual, the ICD-10 manual, let's prevent that. But at the same time, it's an antidote, okay? When people contract deal with adverse effects of stress, loss, trauma, what we now referring to as the ACEs, adversity in life, adverse childhood experiences, what I was searching for there, and its relation to all the mental health disorders we run into in counseling. Person who did not have sufficient resilience to be immunized from those events needs to develop those in order to come back. So it's an antidote and as well as a vaccine. So that begs the question, how do we develop resilience? Some people talk about it's an innate capacity. Yes, it is an innate capacity of humans. But so are a lot of things. We have the innate capacity to learn how to read, but if you've never been taught how to read, you're not going to be a reader. It doesn't just develop naturally on its own. It has to be taught and developed and nurtured. And as we look through the research literature on resilience and all that's been said, we've come up with what I call the 4 building blocks of resilience. And anybody looking to start a program that's resilience focused needs to be thinking of all 4 of these building blocks. They're the 4 cornerstones. And how do we do that? So let's take number 1. Research tells us the most important factor in resilience is the availability of supportive, nurturing social ecosystems. All living organisms require, for healthy development, a nurturing, supportive ecosystem. When fish start floating on their backs down the river, we don't say, what disorder does that fish have? We say, what's wrong with the water? When plants fail to thrive, as they commonly do in my household, as probably most of you have the same little problem, we don't say, gee, what disorder does this plant have? What psychopathology does my plant have that's failing to thrive? We ask what's wrong with the temperature, the soil, the size of the pot, the sunshine, the amount of water. In a supportive environment, things thrive and grow. When things don't thrive and grow, then we ask what's wrong with this environment. Animals in the wild, when they fail to thrive, we start looking at what's wrong with the environmental ecosystem and what toxins are there, as well as what nutrients are missing. And I always find it interesting that we do that with animals, fauna, flora, the fish, that everything and so on. But when it comes to humans, we say, oh, that all works well and good for all the other living organisms, but we're special. We have psychological disorders that afflict us, and our brain doesn't function right, and so forth. And that just doesn't make sense. We're part of the whole ecosystem ourselves. So an organism requires this healthy development. And so when we look at kids from a resilience perspective, or we look at my adult clients from a resilience perspective, the question is not what's wrong with the client. The question is what's been missing in their social and environmental ecosystem. What toxins have been present in their life? We call that trauma, adversity, abuse, terms we use. And at the same time, what nutrients were missing in their environments. And as we enter, though, we have to remember, all of us, we talk about cultural issues. All of us go through and deal with several cultures on a daily basis in our lives. There's our family culture. No 2 families are identical. And there is your community culture, the classroom culture. And each teacher you go through, any student has learned the way to be successful in school is to figure out the cultural system of your teacher and adapt to that cultural system. And no 2 teachers are alike. Schools differ. All the research in effective schools says one thing over and over again. It's not the school, it's not the curriculum, it's not the organizational structure that creates high-functioning schools. Rather, it's the school culture, the social ethos of the school that makes all the difference. And anybody who's at least made it to 3rd grade has figured out, yeah, there's a whole lot of difference. School A to B, there's a whole lot of difference between teachers, last year's teacher, this year's teacher. Some are positive, some have you staring at the clock wondering how long till I can get out of here. And so in our younger years, we have to navigate our way through several different ecosystems in the course of a day, several different cultures. And then there's the community culture, the neighborhoods, the peer community. And then there's our ethnic culture, or nationalist culture, religious cultures. It's a very broad term. And so what are the healthy parts there? Interesting thing in the resilience research has been that kids with even the most difficult life situations, as long as they have at least one healthy, supportive, nurturing ecosystem, one adult in their lives that sticks with them, their chances of having difficulty in life decrease tremendously. So part of our work is developing as many positive, nurturing ecosystems as we can, or guiding our clients towards those kind of systems wherever we can find them. And that's another issue. The second building block of resilience is the development of essential social emotional competencies. Social emotional learning, social emotional competence. We have in the United States for schools, for example, CASEL, the Center for Academic Social Emotional Learning. In Europe, we have NSEC, and I'm now trying to remember the European Network for Social Emotional Competence, both advocating these things. And it's not a new idea, by the way. A man by the name of Aristotle, who lived a few years ago, said that basically educating the mind without educating the heart is no education at all. And the first, what you might call public school, or first school open to the general public in the United States, was opened in 1781, right here in the state I live in now in New Hampshire. It was called, it still is called Phillips Exeter Academy. And Dr. John Smith, who opened that school in 1781, said, the mission of the teachers in the school will be to deal with both the academic knowledge of their students and the moral development, the social development of the students. Because morals without education is weak and feeble, but education without morality is dangerous. And it doesn't take long to name names of people who are highly successful students, brilliant people who did terrible things along the way to people's lives. So we have to have both of those hand in hand. So developing social emotional competencies, and I can trace back for the last several hundred years how if that's kind of risen and fallen with the times, but typically done fairly weekly. Weekly being W-E-A-K-L-Y, not weekly on a daily basis. But developing essential social emotional competencies. And I would identify what seems to be the 5 core social emotional competencies for developing resilience in mental health. First of all, the ability to understand and respect oneself and others. Now, that first one covers what we call, or we still do call, emotional intelligence, understanding my own emotions, my own thoughts. Techniques like mindfulness, meditation are all ways we learn to understand ourselves, but I also need to understand others, my similarities and my difference with people, but always from a position of respecting. We're different, but we're equal in that basis. So that's the first competency, understand both yourself and others. The second social emotional competency that develops resilience is empathy. In fact, studies have suggested of all the social emotional competencies, this is the meta social emotional skill, social emotional competencies. This is the one that determines how well you do the rest. Ability to put yourself in others' shoes. One of the founding fathers of the mental health counseling approach, Alfred Adler, once described empathy as the ability to see through the eyes of another, hear with the ears of another, feel with the heart of another, and I'd add one more, and to think with the mind of another. Doesn't mean I think the same, doesn't mean I say it the same way. I recognize there's different ways to look at this situation, there's different ways to feel, and I need to empathize. I understand how you feel, how you think, how you feel.